What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. I thought I would go ahead and try to knock out as many of these videos as possible. I meant to already have finished this thing, top 10 by position, but because, I do a lot of request videos and because I'm trying to expand the content that I put out on this channel, it's kind of put me behind a little bit, so I'm trying to knock some of these out. Now, I already finished with point guards. I already finished with shooting guards. So I started with small forwards. Today, earlier, I did James Worthy. So that was number 10. So at number 9, I have Dominique Wilkins. That's one spot lower than I had Dominique last time. Dominique was one of the great players, one of the dominant players of his generation. Dominique Wilkins was probably more associated with the dunk than any other player in NBA history, with the exception of Julius Erving. Dominique, I would say his peak was 1985 to maybe 1990-ish, 91 maybe. That was probably the peak years of his career, though he remained a force in the NBA for several more years. One of the great accomplishments of his career was overcoming that serious injury, the Achilles rupture, that was essentially the kiss of death for every other career before his. Up until Kevin Durant, hopefully, knock on wood, Kevin Durant will be the second guy. I hope he stays healthy. But Dominique right now is the only athlete that we've ever seen to successfully, truly overcome coming from that injury and, not really being a shell of himself. He did have to make some adjustments. He didn't go to the rack as much, although he still um, did go from time to time. Um, takes a hold, but and plus he was getting older anyway. He was already past 30 by that point, so he was already in the process of expanding his game. But he became more of a jump shooter. He improved his 3-point shot to the point where at least it was respectable. Um, you know, and he ended up being the comeback player of the year in 92, 93 when he had a very, very dominant campaign with Atlanta Hawks. Um, you know, he scored 26,668 points in his NBA career. He would have scored even more points than that had he not had some years where he played overseas. I believe it was 95, 96 season and the 97, 98 season. He played overseas. And, you know, he's still in my eyes a top 50 all-time player. Um, he's a top 10 small forward, though, on the lower tier. And I'll just say this. Sometimes I've seen some people compare Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan. And while they both were very exciting players, eh, there was some differences. Um, Jordan had a certain mentality that he brought to the game. It's very unique. Dominique was competitive, of course, like anybody, but Jordan, just brought certain qualities that are rare. Also, to me, Dominique did have some weaknesses. He was not noted for his defensive ability, unlike his brother Gerald. Um, Dominique also was a bit of a gunner. He could be a bit of a shot jacker. Okay, he did have some nights where he shot the ball pretty poorly. Okay, um, you know, in his prime, he routinely missed 1,000 shots a season. He shot about 46% from the floor for his career, which isn't terrible, but considering his size and athleticism and his shot selection, remember he didn't shoot a lot of threes. Um, so you would think he would shoot a little better than that. By contrast, Kobe Bryant was a 6'6", 200-pound guard, shot 44.7%, and he shot a lot of threes in comparison to Dominique Wilkins. You know what I'm saying? Um, and he was also sort of, considering his strength, he was a little bit of an underwhelming rebounder. You know, you would think Dominique would have the ability to grab maybe 8.5, 9 rebounds a game, but 6.7 was little bit low, a little bit. But other than that, Dominique Wilkins is a tremendous player, and he deserves to be, remembered with respect and reverence. Now, his story didn't start in the United States. Actually, it started in Paris, France. I believe he was born in January of 1960. His father was an airman in the U.S. Air Force, and like Ray Allen, I think I believe his father also was in the Air Force, and because of that, he moved around a lot too. Dominique Wilkins' family moved to Dallas when he was very young, Dallas, Texas. Then afterward, they moved to Baltimore, Maryland, before eventually settling into Washington, North Carolina, where he attended Washington High School. It was there that Dominique Wilkins showed his athletic prowess and basketball, um, acumen, where he was the back-to-back MVP for the team's consecutive Class 3A state championship in 1978 and 1979. Wilkins was in the Faces in the Crowd section of Sports Illustrated while in high school for a performance in a game versus a higher classification school in which he had 48 points and 27 rebounds and 8 blocks. Wilkins then starred in the McDonald's All American Game, the Capital Classic, the Kentucky Derby Festival Classic, and the Dapper Dan Classic All Star Game. Each one of these contests he shined. He then entered the University of Georgia in 1979 with an already established reputation as one of the most exciting young players in the country. At the University of Georgia, in his 3 year campaign there, he averaged 21.6 points a game. And he was named the SEC Men's Basketball Player of the Year in 1981. Dominique Wilkins decided to forego his senior year at Georgia and enter the 1982 NBA draft. Now, this is the same draft that had James Worthy, who was number 10 on my list. As a matter of fact, Dominique was third in that draft behind James Worthy and Terry Cummings, who was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, I believe. And Terry Cummings is another guy who, um, you know, I think is sort of in that he's a fringe guy. Like when it comes to Hall of Fame, he's a fringe guy, but he was a hell of a player, especially before that injury, the knee injury he suffered in 1992. Um, Dominique Wilkins was selected by the Utah Jazz. Dominique Wilkins had no interest whatsoever playing with Utah, so he was eventually traded. Not immediately, but before the season started, he was traded to the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for John, John Drew and Freeman Williams and $1 million in cash. This is now considered one of the most lopsided trades in Atlanta Hawks' favor, obviously, in NBA history. Dominique Wilkins' rookie year, 82-83, he averaged 17.5 points per game and had one of the more dominant campaigns in the NBA that particular year. Um, I believe James Worthy won Rookie of the Year in 82-83. I think he won Rookie of the Year that year. His second year with Atlanta Hawks, which would be 83-84, Dominique Wilkins averaged 21 points. I think it was 21.4 points per game. His second year in the NBA. It was his third year, 84-85, that Dominique Wilkins really began to shine as an NBA player. It was that year that he notched his first slam dunk championship at the NBA All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis. That season, he averaged 27.4 points per game, good for six in the NBA. That year, he led the NBA in field goal attempts with 1,891 shot attempts. Despite the fact that Dominique was never a great overall shooter, wasn't the worst, but he wasn't great. He was a decent foul shooter. He shot for his career about 80, I think 82% for, from the foul line, so he was a very good foul shooter. Um, he was never a great 3-point shooter, but he did get better over the years, in particular after he suffered that Achilles rupture in January of 1992. He tried to um, expand his game as he got more established as a player. And I can understand that from the fact that he was probably so associated with the dunk that he wanted to prove that he was a more well-rounded player than just a guy that dunked. You know, um, that might have been one thing that hurt, say, a guy like Daryl Dawkins, the late great Daryl Dawkins, who was so associated with the dunk. You know, and maybe because of that, he never really expanded his game to get to his full potential. But anyway, that season, despite Dominique Wilkins' dominance, Atlanta finished only 34 and 48 and failed to reach the playoffs. The next year, Dominique Wilkins upped the ante even more during the 85-86 season, where he captured his one and only scoring title, where he averaged 30.3 points per game. He was voted the NBA All-Star for the first time and was voted to the All-NBA first team at the end of the season. Um, he failed to repeat as slam dunk champion due to the fact that he would lose to his own teammate and Spud Webb that year. Spud had one of the great slam dunk um, contest performances of all time. The Atlanta Hawks would finish at 50 and 32 that year, and this is when I was mentioning before that a lot of people forget that the Atlanta Hawks were a pretty good team for a little stretch in the mid to late 1980s into the 1990s. They also had some good years in the 90s during the Dominique Wilkins era, but they never quite got to where they probably should. I'm not saying that he had a super team around him, he didn't, and I'm not saying that Dominique Wilkins should have won a title, but one of the other knocks on Dominique Wilkins too is that a lot of people feel like he didn't make players around him better. Um, he was never noted for being a strong passer. But at the same time, in his defense, not everybody's going to have a game like LeBron James. You know, not everybody's going to be a triple double threat. That's just not what their game is. Um, the next year, the 86-87 season, Dominique would finish second in the league in scoring with 29 points per game. But, everybody was well behind Jordan that year, who averaged an insane 37.1 points per game. It was also that season that Dominique Wilkins tied the franchise record for points in a game. That record was shared, and is still shared by Bob Pettit and Lou Hudson, where he scored 57 points uh, in a game. I believe it was that year. That year, the Hawks also went 57 and 25, which at the time was a franchise record. That year, they would make it to the Eastern Conference semifinals before losing to the Detroit Pistons, who were rising as a force themselves. During the 87-88 season, Wilkins posted the highest scoring average of his career and finished second to Jordan in the NBA scoring race. He averaged 30.7 points for the Hawks, but Jordan averaged 35 points per game. Jordan also controversially defeated Dominique Wilkins in the slam dunk championship that year in Chicago. Wilkins earned a berth on the All-NBA second team, became the first Hawks player to be named NBA Player of the Week 3 times in a season. In his third All-Star game appearance, Wilkins scored 29 points on 12 of 22 shooting, leading the East squad to a 138 to 133 victory. Atlanta went 50 and 32 that year, and they went all the way to the Eastern Conference semifinals before losing to the Boston Celtics in 7 games. That seventh game is now remembered as the duel game between Wilkins and Bird. Wilkins, um, may have won the scoring battle between he and Bird, scoring 47 points, Bird scoring 34. But Bird won the war, outdueling Wilkins in the fourth quarter. I think he scored 20 points in the fourth quarter. Bird was actually having a poor game before exploding in the fourth quarter. And ultimately, the Boston Celtics prevailed. During the next season with the Hawks, Wilkins' scoring average dropped a little bit to 26.2, which was good for seventh in the NBA, but he was an all-star for the fourth straight year. That year, he shot a career best 84% from the foul line. And the Hawks that year added Reggie Theus, a former Chicago Bull and former Sacramento King, and Moses Malone to the team. Moses Malone, who the Sixers foolishly thought was done when they dealt him in '86, averaged 20 points and almost 12 rebounds per game. 3 years after they thought he was done, Theus averaged almost 16 points a game. Without Kevin Willis, however, the Atlanta Hawks lost to Milwaukee Bucks in the first round, and Wilkins averaged over 27 points in the playoffs. During the 89-90 season, Dominique Wilkins once again won the Slam Dunk Championship, edging out Sacramento Kings Kenny the Jet Smith for his second NBA Slam Dunk Championship. That year, he averaged 26.7 points per game to finish fifth in the NBA scoring race. He led the Hawks in steals for the first time since '86. His 48.4% field goal percentage was the best since his rookie year when he shot over 49%. And for the sixth straight year, he did not foul out of a game. This year, however, Atlanta Hawks struggled at 41 and 41, and that was Mike Fratello's last season as the Hawks head coach. The 1991 season kind of marked a transitional period for Dominique. A little bit, just a little bit. In 1991, he averaged a career high 9 rebounds. Like I said, he was capable of being a great rebounder. I just don't understand why he didn't average more like he did that season. That was the first time he led the Hawks in that category in his NBA career. He also led the team in scoring for the 8th straight year, averaging 25.9 points per game. That year, he was showing the three-point shot that he was starting to add to his game as he was getting older. He was now over 30 years old. He hit 85 of 249 threes for a 34.1 percentage. That's not that great by today's standards, but the league average at that time was around 33%, so it was a little bit actually better than average at that time. Wilkins made his 6th All-Star game appearance, scoring 12 points in the East, 116-114 victory over the West. It was during that game, however, that Dominique Wilkins, if I remember correctly, in the All-Star game, he spazzed the wide open dunk. And that was some of the early telltale signs that the Dominique high flyer that we saw in the '80s was starting to lose a little bit of his athleticism. All right. During that playoffs, the Atlanta Hawks pushed the Detroit Pistons to the 5th game of the first round, but Detroit routed Atlanta 113 to 81, in Game 5. That was back when the first round was still a best-of-5 affair. The Detroit Pistons held Dominique Wilkins to less than 21 points and only 37% shooting in that series. It was a game against the Philadelphia 76ers in 1991-92 where Dominique Wilkins ruptured his Achilles tendon, January 28, 1992. It was also during that game, ironically, that Wilkins scored his 20,000th career point. On the day of the injury, Wilkins was named a reserve on the Eastern Conference All-Star team. At the time, his 28.1 points per game scoring average was his highest in 5 years, and the 52 points he scored in a overtime game a month earlier against Knicks was the most by any player that season. There was much speculation that his career was over. Got to remember that fresh in people's memories was the injury that Bernard King suffered, and while Bernard King was able to come back and the year prior be an All-Star again, Bernard King had to alter his game a lot, and he never was able to be the same dominant force that he was before. And we're talking about Achilles rupture that ended careers. You know, that ended the career of lesser players than Dominique. And Dominique was a guy that was so predicated and so associated with athleticism that many people thought it was the end of his career. But Dominique Wilkins persevered, um, and he was able to successfully come back from that career, from that injury. He averaged almost 28 points per game in the first month of the season. On December 8th, 1992, he set a record for free throws made in the game without a miss, hitting 23 free throws in a row. Um, in January of 1993, he averaged 29.4 points per game on 49% shooting. Then in February, he averaged 31.5 points per game on 52% shooting. By the end of the season, he averaged 29.9 points per game, second only to Michael Jordan's 32.6, and he was a comeback player of the year. When Dominique was asked about his mindset, I remember him saying this on open court. He said that the best thing that he did was he just wasn't thinking about it anymore. Like a lot of athletes, one of the reasons why they get injured is because they're thinking about it, they're worrying about it, and then they get injured. Dominique said that he just decided after a while, not to refrain himself and just not think about it. And he never really had a serious injury again, I believe, in his career. He had some injury, but not serious to that extent. So, the 93-94 season, um, Dominique Wilkins, but before I go into that, it was also that season that Dominique Wilkins broke Bob Pettit's franchise record of 20,880 points. And that year he hit 120 out of 316 threes. And unfortunately, in the first round that year, the Atlanta Hawks were swept by the Chicago Bulls in the first round. Into his 12th season, the 93-94 season, the Atlanta Hawks, this is one of the trades that I just don't understand. The Atlanta Hawks were a really good team in 93-94, and Wilkins was actually playing very well. He averaged 20, at the time he was averaging 24 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and the Hawks were 36-16. But they traded essentially Wilkins for Danny Manning uh, right before the trade deadline in February that year. Hawks management and new coach Lenny Wilkins claimed that Manning and his skills will help the team more during the stretch run. However, many believe that money was the primary reason the Hawks made the trade. Wilkins' contract expired at the end of the season, and the Hawks may not have been willing to commit a new long-term contract to a player who was almost 35 years old. Now, after the trade, Dominique Wilkins played with the Clippers, and then afterward, 94-95 season, he played with the Boston Celtics. Um, I believe after the 94-95 season, Dominique Wilkins was not happy with the contract offer with the Boston Celtics, and also he wasn't happy with being on a rebuilding team, so he went overseas. He went overseas and played over there, had some success. I believe he won a championship with the Greek League or something like that over there. Can't remember too much of the intricacies of teams over there, but I remember he won a championship, I think, with Greece or whatever. And he came back in 96, 97, and he played with the San Antonio Spurs. This was the year Dave Robinson was injured. They were a terrible team that year. I think they only won 21 games. But Dominique Wilkins shined with them that year. Um, and he was one of the better, six men in the NBA that year. I think the next year, Dominique Wilkins played overseas again. But by the time of his final year in the NBA, 98, 99, Dominique was a truly a shell of himself by then. He played Atlanta Magic that year. I remember watching him, and I'm like, hey, man, that's not Dominique Wilkins. This isn't Dominique Wilkins. This is just some dude with Dominique Wilkins jersey on. And afterward, subsequently he retired from professional basketball. Dominique Wilkins finished with 26,668 points. I think he was an all-star for 9 years. I believe he was an all-star. He played at a very high level for a decade, more so. Great player. Um, NBA Hall of Famer. You know, Dominique Wilkins, man. What more can I say, man? Tell me what you guys think.